The most powerful criminal on Earth with mansions in 7 countries discovers his new maid is an undercover agent, but decides to protect her. Hey there, I'm Alex, your guide through today's extraordinary tale on Hearts of Crime. What you're about to witness is a story of passion and danger that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Trust me, when I say the twist at the end will leave you absolutely speechless. If you enjoy these forbidden love stories, please hit that like button and drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our daily uploads of these incredible stories. Stay with me until the very end. I promise the conclusion will shock you in ways you can't imagine. So sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. Have a wonderful day, and may God bless you and your family. The bullet whizzed past Isabella's ear, missing by mere inches as she ducked behind a marble column. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't how the operation was supposed to go. The handsome man she'd been tracking for the past few months, the one she was supposed to gather intelligence on, was now hunting her through his lavish mansion. Julian Caldwell's voice echoed through the cavernous main hall. Come out, wherever you are." His tone was oddly playful for someone who had just discovered an undercover agent in his home. "I'm not going to hurt you much." Isabella Hart gripped her concealed weapon tightly, her knuckles white with tension. The agency had warned her that Caldwell was dangerous, a crime lord with connections spreading across continents, but they failed to mention how perceptive he was. How had he discovered her identity so quickly? She'd been careful, meticulous even, and they certainly hadn't warned her about his magnetic charm. "I know who sent you," Julian called out, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the marble floor as he approached. "The question is, what am I going to do with you now?" Isabella took a deep breath, steeling herself. She had trained for years for situations like this. Quietly, she removed her shoes, preparing to move silently across the floor to the nearest exit. 3 steps. That is all she needed to make it to the hallway and then to the service entrance. 1, 2. A strong hand caught her wrist, twisting her around. Julian Caldwell stood towering over her, his piercing blue eyes boring into hers. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that highlighted his broad shoulders. His dark hair fell perfectly across his forehead, and a hint of stubble defined his jawline. Even in this moment of danger, Isabella couldn't help noticing how devastatingly handsome he was. "Agent Hart," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "Or should I call you Maria, my supposedly loyal maid?" Isabella tried to break free, but his grip was like iron. "How did you know?" she demanded. Julian smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "You were good, I'll give you that. Almost perfect in your role. But you made one mistake." "Which was?" "You cared too much." He loosened his hold slightly but didn't let go. "No maid has ever asked me if I was sleeping well or noticed when I skipped meals. No one in my life has ever paid that much attention." Isabella swallowed hard. It was true. She had noticed his late nights, the dark circles under his eyes, the way he sometimes stared out the window with a look of such profound loneliness that it had stirred something in her. Compassion, curiosity, something she shouldn't have felt for a target. "So what now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Are you going to kill me?" Julian tilted his head, studying her face with unexpected intensity. That would be the logical choice, wouldn't it? His free hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, the gesture surprisingly gentle. "But I find myself hesitating." A commotion outside broke the moment. Car doors slammed and voices approached. Julian's expression changed, urgency replacing curiosity. "Someone else is coming for you or for me. Either way, we have a problem." He released her wrist but grabbed her hand. "Come with me if you want to live." "Why would you help me?" Isabella asked, suspicious but also intrigued. "Let us just say I am following my instincts," Julian replied, pulling her toward a concealed door behind a bookcase. "And right now they're retelling me you were more valuable alive than dead." As they disappeared into a hidden passage, Isabella heard the main door crash open. Julian pressed a button, and the bookcase slid shut behind them, plunging them into dim light. They stood in a narrow corridor barely a foot apart. She could smell his expensive cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. "Your people or mine?" she whispered. "Neither," Julian replied grimly. "Those are Nikolai S. men, and if they are here, we both in danger." Isabella felt a chill. Nikolai Petrov was notorious, even more dangerous than Julian was reputed to be. If he was involved, this situation had just become infinitely more complicated. "Why would Petrov come after you? I thought you were business partners." Julian's laugh was bitter. "In this world, today, S partner is tomorrow's enemy. I discovered something I shouldn't to have. Something big." He glanced at her, a decision forming in his eyes. "Something your agency would be very interested in." "So I am your bargaining chip?" "No," Julian said, surprising her. "You're my insurance policy, but first, we need to get out of here alive." The narrow passage led them to a garage housing several luxury vehicles. Julian quickly disabled the tracking devices on a sleek black sedan and ushered Isabella inside. "Where are we going?" she asked as they sped away from the mansion through an underground tunnel. "Somewhere safe," Julian replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I have a property that no one knows about. Not my associates, not Petrov, and certainly not your agency." As they emerged onto a quiet country road, Isabella studied his profile. Julian Caldwell was an enigma, a criminal capable of terrible things according to her briefing, yet he was risking his life to save hers. What game was he playing? "Why are you really helping me?" she asked again. Julian was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he spoke, his voice softer than before. "Because for the first time in a long time, someone looked at me and saw a person, not just a threat or an asset." He glanced at her briefly. "Even if it was just part of your cover." Isabella felt something twist in her chest. It hadn't all been an act, that was the problem. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Julian said, a grim smile playing on his lips, "we make a deal. I'll protect you from Petrov, and in return, you will hear what I have to say before reporting back to your superiors." "And if I don't agree?" "Then I'll drop you at the nearest town and we'll go our separate ways." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "But I should warn you, Petrov's reach is extensive, and he doesn't leave loose ends." Isabella weighed her options. Her mission had been to gather intelligence on Julian Caldwell's operation. If he was willing to talk, this could be the breakthrough her agency had been waiting for. And if Petrov was involved, this was bigger than her original assignment. "All right," she said finally. "I will listen, but no guarantees beyond that." Julian nodded, seemingly satisfied. As they drove deeper into the countryside, Isabella couldn't help wondering if she had just made a pact with the devil, or if there was more to Julian Caldwell than met the eye. What neither of them realized was that the choices they made in the next few days would not only change their lives forever, but would also expose secrets that powerful people had killed to keep buried. The safe house was nothing like Isabella expected. Instead of the opulent displays of wealth that characterized Julian's mansion, this was a modest cottage, tucked away in rolling countryside, surrounded by wildflowers and old oak trees. It looked more like a retreat for a novelist than a hideout for one of the world's most notorious crime lords. "Not what you anticipated?" Julian asked, catching her surprised expression as he unlocked the weathered front door. "I expected something more." "Ostentatious," he smiled, a genuine warmth reaching his eyes. Sometimes the best hiding place is the one that doesn't look like a hiding place at all. Inside, the cottage was cozy but sparsely furnished. Comfortable leather furniture, well-stocked bookshelves, and a kitchen with the basics. No luxury, no excess, nothing that screamed Julian Caldwell. "Sir, your agency's file on me is incomplete," Julian commented, moving to check the perimeter security system, a sophisticated contrast to the rustic exterior. "They see what I want them to see." Isabella remained guarded. "And what is it you want me to see?" Julian's expression grew serious. "The truth, but first we need to talk about Nikolai Petrov." Over coffee, which Julian prepared himself rather than commanding her as he would a real maid, he explained his history with Petrov. They had indeed been business partners, dealing in various enterprises across Europe and Asia. some legitimate, many not. 6 months ago I discovered Petrov was trafficking young women, Julian said, his voice cold with disgust. That crosses a line for me. Isabella raised an eyebrow. You have moral lines? Your file suggests otherwise. Everyone has lines, Agent Hart. Julian's gaze was steady. Even monsters like me. He explained how he'd been systematically dismantling Petrov's human trafficking operation, freeing victims, redirecting shipments, sabotaging deals, all while maintaining the facade of business as usual. Petrov suspected someone was interfering but couldn't prove it was me until 3 days ago. Julian's jaw tightened. One of my most trusted people betrayed me. Now Petrov wants revenge, and he wants to stop until I am dead. And where do I fit into this? Isabella asked. Your agency has been trying to build a case against Petrov for years, with little success. I have enough evidence to bring down his entire network. Julian leaned forward. Names, dates, locations, bank accounts, everything they need. Isabella's mind raced. If what Julian was saying was true, this would be the biggest human trafficking bust in agency history. But she'd been trained to be skeptical. Why would you give us this information? What's your angle? Protection, Julian answered simply. For myself, yes, but also for someone else. Someone Petrov would use against me in a heartbeat if he knew of their existence. Before Isabella could press for details, a security alert chimed. Julian checked his phone and frowned. We might have company soon. Petrov's men move quickly. He led her to what appeared to be a pantry, but revealed a hidden room containing weapons, cash, and multiple passports. Julian handed her a gun. I assume you know how to use this? Isabella checked the weapon with practiced ease. Better than you might think. That earned her a smile. I never underestimate you, Agent Hart. The intimacy of his words hung in the air between them. For a moment, neither spoke. We should move, Julian finally said. There was a car in the garage with clean papers. We'll head north. I need to contact my handler, Isabella insisted. They need to know about Petrov. Julian hesitated, then nodded. Make it quick, and don't mention me. Not yet. Isabella stepped away to make a secure call, cryptically informing her agency about Petrov's operation without revealing her current situation or Julian's involvement. When she returned, Julian was packing essential supplies. They'll need proof, she told him. Hard evidence. Which is precisely why we're re-heading to my next location, Julian replied. Everything is there. The drive was tense, both scanning constantly for threats. They took back roads, switching vehicles once at an abandoned property Julian owned under a shell company. How many of these places do you have? Isabella asked as they continued in the new car. Enough, Julian replied with a half-smile. Paranoia keeps people like me alive. As the hours passed, their conversation drifted beyond the immediate crisis. Julian spoke of growing up in poverty, his intelligence recognized by a mentor who guided him into the criminal world. Isabella shared sanitized versions of her own past, her drive for justice stemming from personal loss. We're not so different, Julian observed, both shaped by our pasts, both willing to cross lines for what we believe in. The difference is which lines we cross, Isabella countered, though with less conviction than she would have had days earlier. As evening approached, they reached a secluded cabin by a lake. The setting sun painted the water gold, creating a scene so peaceful it was hard to remember they were fugitives. We'll stay here tonight, Julian decided. There is no electronic trail to this place. It's paid for in cash through multiple proxies. Inside the cabin, Julian showed her to a room where she could rest, then busied himself securing the perimeter. Isabella took the opportunity to secretly check for any signs that would confirm or deny his story about Petrov. In Julian's bag, she found a flash drive labeled with Cyrillic characters and a small worn photograph. The photo showed Julian with his arm around a woman who shared his striking blue eyes. A sister, perhaps. They looked happy, carefree in a way that Julian she knew never seemed to be. Her name is Natalia. Julian's voice came from behind her. Isabella spun, caught in the act. To her surprise, he didn't seem angry, just resigned. My sister. The person I am trying to protect. Julian took the photo gently from her hands. Petrov doesn't know about her. I've kept her existence hidden for years, supported her from a distance. She has a normal life, a husband, a child. Everything I made sure she could have. Why are you telling me this? Isabella asked quietly. Because I need you to understand what's at stake. His eyes locked with hers. If I go down, she needs to remain protected. That's my condition for giving your agency everything on Petrov. The raw vulnerability in his expression caught Isabella off guard. This wasn't the calculated crime lord from her briefing files. This was a man willing to sacrifice himself for someone he loved. I cannot make promises on behalf of my agency, she said carefully. I know, but you can make a personal one. Julian stepped closer. If something happens to me, make sure Petrov never learns about Natalia. Before Isabella could respond, a distant sound caught their attention, the unmistakable approach of vehicles on the gravel road. They've found us, Julian said grimly, moving quickly to the window. 3 cars. Petrov S-men. Isabella joined him, assessing the situation. How? We were careful. There must be a tracker we missed, or... His expression darkened. Someone at your agency could be compromised. The accusation stung, but Isabella couldn't dismiss it. There had been rumors of a mole. What is the plan? Julian pointed to the lake behind the cabin. There is a boat docked at the pier. The evidence is in a waterproof case beneath the floorboards. If we get separated, take it straight to someone you trust completely. They gathered what they needed quickly. Julian handed Isabella the flash drive from his bag. This is everything on Petrov. Names, dates, bank accounts, enough to destroy him. As they prepared to make their escape through the back door, Julian paused. In the fading light, his features were softer, almost vulnerable. Isabella, he said, using her real name for the first time. In another life. He did not finish the thought. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her, brief but intense, filled with everything they couldn't to say. Isabella responded before she could stop herself, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer for one breathless moment. When they broke apart, Julian's eyes held a mixture of regret and resolve. Ready? Isabella nodded, pushing aside the complicated emotions surging through her. Ready. They slipped out the back door just as the front of the cabin erupted with gunfire. Julian pushed Isabella toward the pier. Go. I'll hold them off. I am not leaving you. The words escaped before she could consider their implications. You have to, Julian fired back at their pursuers. The evidence is what matters. Get it to your people. A bullet whizzed past, splintering wood near Isabella's head. Julian made the decision for her, physically shoving her toward the lake. Go, now. Heart pounding, Isabella ran for the pier, Julian's covering fire behind her. She reached the boat and jumped in, starting the engine as bullets hit the water around her. Looking back, she saw Julian engaged in a firefight with multiple assailants. She had a clear shot at escape. The logical choice, the professional choice, would be to take the evidence and leave, complete the mission. That is what her training dictated. Instead, Isabella turned the boat back toward shore. What are you doing? Julian shouted when he spotted her. Being stupid, apparently, she called back, positioning the boat for a quick extraction. She fired her weapon at Petrov's men, creating the covering fire Julian needed to make a run for it. He sprinted down the pier and leapt into the boat. Isabella gunned the engine immediately, and they sped away across the darkening lake, bullets piercing the water behind them. That was reckless, Julian panted, bleeding from a graze on his arm. You re-welcome, Isabella replied, focusing on putting distance between them and their pursuers. Consider it professional courtesy. Julian's laugh was unexpected, a genuine sound of amusement. Is that what we're calling it? Isabella didn't answer, keeping her eyes on the far shore. She wasn't ready to examine her motivations too closely. They reached the opposite side of the lake and abandoned the boat, continuing on foot through dense woods. Julian seemed to know exactly where they were going, leading them to a hidden trail. There is a small airfield a few miles from here, he explained as they hiked. A pilot who owes me a favor. He can get us out of the country. I'm not leaving the country, Isabella objected. I need to get this evidence to my superiors. Your superiors might be compromised, Julian reminded her. Think about it. How else did Petrov's men find us so quickly? The possibility had been gnawing at Isabella since the cabin. If there was indeed a mole in the agency, delivering the evidence directly could mean its disappearance, and possibly her own. There is someone I trust, she said finally. For someone outside the normal chain of command, but I need to contact her directly. Julian considered this. Once we reach the airfield, you can make the call. If your contact can meet us, we'll stay. If not, we fly. It was a reasonable compromise. They continued through the woods in tense silence, both alert for any signs of pursuit. Despite the danger, Isabella found herself hyper-aware of Julian's presence beside her. His controlled movements, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the lingering memory of that kiss. You rethinking too loudly, Julian commented after a while, his voice low. Just wondering how my life turned into this, Isabella replied. A week ago, I was just an undercover maid gathering intelligence. Now I am running through the woods with my target after he kissed me. Technically, you kissed me back, Julian pointed out, a hint of amusement in his tone despite their situation, a momentary lapse in judgment. Is that what we recalling it? He echoed her earlier phrase. Before she could respond, they reached the edge of the woods. Beyond a clearing lay a small private airstrip with a single hangar. Wait here, Julian instructed. Let me make sure it's safe. Isabella watched as he approached the hangar cautiously. A man emerged, older with the weathered look of a long-time pilot. They spoke briefly, and Julian gestured for her to join them. This is Frank, Julian introduced. He doesn't ask questions, and he is very good at his job. Frank nodded to Isabella, his expression neutral. The plane fueled and ready. Where to? Isabella pulled out her secure phone. I need to make a call first. She stepped away to contact her trusted superior, a veteran agent named Director Helena Chen, who had recruited Isabella personally and operated somewhat independently within the agency. After explaining the situation in careful terms, she arranged a meeting point. We have a rendezvous in 3 hours, Isabella informed Julian. Small airfield near the capital. Director Chen will meet us personally with a security team she trusts implicitly. Julian studied her face. You trust this woman with your life? With Natalia's life? Yes, Isabella answered without hesitation. She is the one person in the agency I am certain isn't compromised. Julian nodded slowly. Then we go to your meeting. Frank, change of plans. As they boarded the small plane, Isabella noticed Julian wincing. In the better light of the aircraft, she could see his injury was worse than she initially thought. You need medical attention, she said, examining the bullet graze on his arm. It can wait, he dismissed. Isabella found a first aid kit and insisted on cleaning and bandaging the wound. As she worked, their proximity felt charged with unspoken tension. Why did you really come back for me at the cabin? Julian asked quietly. The smart play was to take the evidence and go. Isabella's hands stilled momentarily. I don't know, she admitted. Instinct, maybe. So the same instinct that made me not shoot you when I discovered you were an agent. Their eyes met, and Isabella felt something shift between them, a mutual recognition that whatever was happening defied the neat categories of agent and criminal, target and operative. We both made choices that don't make sense on paper, she acknowledged. Yet here we are. Julian Diaz's voice was soft. The moment was interrupted by Frank announcing they were ready for takeoff. As the plane rose into the night sky, Isabella found herself wondering what would happen after they landed. Once the evidence was in agency hands, Julian would likely be taken into custody despite his cooperation. The thought troubled her more than it should. What happens next? She asked, echoing the question she deposed when they first fled his mansion. Julian gazed out the window at the darkness below. That depends on a lot of things. Your agency, Petrov, whether the evidence is enough. And us? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Julian turned to her, his expression unreadable in the dim cabin light. Is there an us, Agent Hart? Isabella didn't answer. She wasn't sure she knew. As the plane carried them toward what might be safety, or a new kind of danger, one thing became increasingly clear to Isabella. Whether she liked it or not, her fate and Julian Caldwell AECS had become intertwined in ways neither of them could have anticipated. And somewhere in the tangled web of loyalty, duty, and unexpected connection, she would have to decide where her true priorities lay. What neither of them suspected was that the most dangerous part of their journey was yet to come, and that the choices awaiting them would test not only their newfound trust, but also reveal secrets that would change everything Isabella thought she knew about her mission, her agency, and Julian Caldwell himself. The small airfield was shrouded in pre-dawn mist when their plane touched down. Isabella scanned the area as they taxied to a stop, searching for any sign of Director Chen or her team. A single black SUV waited on the tarmac, its windows tinted. "That's her," Isabella confirmed, recognizing the vehicle. "Director Chen always travels with a low profile." Julian S.'s face remained impassive, but Isabella noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. "And you're certain she is not compromised?" "As certain as I can be about anyone." Isabella checked her weapon one last time. "She recruited me personally, mentored me. If there is anyone in the agency I trust with my life, it's her." Frank brought the plane to a complete stop and powered down. "This is where we part ways," he said, not looking at either of them. "Good luck." Isabella thanked the pilot, while Julian slipped him an envelope that he quickly tucked away. Some debts, it seemed, were paid in cash. As they descended the small staircase to the tarmac, the SUV's door opened. Director Helena Chen emerged, a striking woman with steel-grey hair cut in a precise bob, her posture military straight, despite being past middle age. "Isabella," Chen greeted with a nod, her sharp eyes immediately taking in Julian S.'s presence. "And Mr. Caldwell, I presume?" Julian inclined his head slightly. "Director." Chen's gaze swept over both of them, noting Isabella's disheveled appearance and Julian's bandaged arm. "You had an eventful few days." "That is one way of putting it," Isabella replied. "Do you have the secure transport we discussed?" "Of course," Chen gestured to the SUV. "We were taking you both to a safe house where we can debrief properly. My team has secured the perimeter." Isabella noticed Julian scanning the surroundings with practiced caution. She could almost see him calculating escape routes, assessing threats, old habits. "The evidence?" Chen inquired. Isabella patted her jacket pocket. "Everything on Petrov. Names, dates, bank accounts. Enough to dismantle his entire network." Something flickered in Chen's eyes, satisfaction perhaps, or relief. "Then let us not waste time standing in the open." They approached the SUV, where a driver waited behind the wheel. As they neared, Isabella felt Julian tense beside her. Before she could question it, he gripped her arm, stopping her in her tracks. "Something's wrong," he murmured, barely audible. Isabella followed his gaze to the driver. The man's face was unfamiliar, but that wasn't unusual. Chen worked with a rotating team of trusted operatives. "What is it?" she whispered. "The way he's holding the wheel. 10 and 2, military precision. Your agency doesn't train like that." Isabella's instincts flared to life. Small details that had seemed insignificant suddenly felt important. Chen arriving with only one team member, the unusual stillness of the airfield, the fact that Chen hadn't asked a single question about how they evaded Petrov's men. "Get back to the plane," Julian breathed, his grip on her arm tightening fractionally. "Isabella," Chen called, already at the SUV. "Is there a problem?" Isabella made a split-second decision, trusting Julian's instincts and her own growing unease. "Just discussing something with Mr. Caldwell," she called back, already backing away subtly. "One moment." Chen's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "We do not have time for private conversations. Petrov's men could be anywhere." The mention of Petrov confirmed Isabella's suspicions. She had never told Chen who was after them, only that she had evidence of a major trafficking operation. Isabella drew her weapon in one fluid motion, aiming it at the woman she had once trusted implicitly. "How long have you been working for him?" Chen's facade dropped like a curtain falling. Her expression turned cold, calculating. "Long enough to know when a promising agent has been compromised." Her eyes flicked to Julian. He turned your head, Isabella. Made you forget your duty. My duty was never to protect human traffickers, Isabella replied, her aim unwavering despite the shock coursing through her. How much is Petrov paying you? More than you could imagine, Chen said dismissively. But it is not just about money, it is about power, being on the winning side. Julian had drawn his own weapon, aimed at the driver who now had a gun trained on them through the SUV's window. Isabella, Julian said quietly, we need to move, now. Keeping her gun trained on Chen, Isabella began backing toward the plane. Frank, she called over her shoulder, start the engines. There was no response from the cockpit. Isabella risked a glance back and saw Frank slumped over the controls, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Your pilot wanted to be helping you, Chen said with cold satisfaction. Petrov's men arrived before you did, and the realization hit Isabella like a physical blow. They had flown directly into a trap. The hangar, Julian muttered, already shifting his position to cover their retreat. On 3. Isabella nodded imperceptibly. 1, 2... Before Julian could say 3, gunfire erupted from the tree line at the edge of the airfield, but surprisingly the shots weren't aimed at them, they were targeting Chen and her driver. Chen dove for cover behind the SUV, cursing as she returned fire toward the trees. Who the hell is that? Isabella asked, as she and Julian used the distraction to sprint toward the hangar. No idea, Julian replied, but I'm not waiting to find out if they were friendly. They reached the hangar doors and slipped inside, finding it empty except for a small maintenance vehicle. Julian immediately went to work hot-wiring it while Isabella covered the entrance. Who would be shooting at Chen? She wondered aloud. Petrov's men wouldn't fire on their own people. Unless... Julian paused, a realization dawning. Unless they not Petrov's men. He looked up at Isabella, something like hope in his eyes. You said you trusted Chen. Who else knew about this meeting? Isabella shook her head. No one. I called her on a secure line that... Her eyes widened. That she gave me when I started this assignment. A line that could be monitored, Julian concluded, by someone who suspected Chen might be compromised. The maintenance vehicle roared to life. Julian moved to the driver's seat. Time to go. Isabella jumped in beside him. Where? We were surrounded. Not for long. Julian gunned the engine and crashed through the side door of the hangar, away from both Chen and the mysterious shooters in the trees. They sped across the airfield toward a service road, bullets pinging off the metal frame of their vehicle. Isabella returned fire when she could, but their priority was escape. As they bounced along the rough road leading away from the airfield, Isabella tried to process Chen's betrayal. Her mentor, the woman who had shaped her career, had been in Petrov's pocket all along. She was the one who assigned me to infiltrate your organization, Isabella realized aloud. She wanted me to gather intelligence on you because you were undermining Petrov's operations. Julian nodded grimly. And when I discovered you were an agent, she probably expected me to kill you. Problem solved. Instead, you protected me. Instead, we protected each other, Julian corrected, navigating the vehicle around a sharp bend in the road. Isabella's mind raced. If Chen is compromised, who can we trust with the evidence? Julian was quiet for a moment, his eyes focused on the road ahead. There was one option we have not considered. What is that? We take down Petrov ourselves. Isabella stared at him. That's insane. The two of us against Petrov's entire organization. Not his entire organization, Julian argued. Just Petrov himself, cut off the head, and the rest falls apart. He glanced at her. With the evidence you have, we can destroy his reputation, freeze his assets, turn his allies against him. But first we need to get to him. And how exactly do we do that? Julian's expression was grim. I know where he'll be tomorrow night. High-stakes poker game at his private club. Very exclusive, very secure. And you think we can just walk in? Isabella asked incredulously. Not as ourselves, no. Julian turned onto a main road, putting distance between them and the airfield. But I have identities that even Petrov doesn't know about, and access to resources Chen and her team aren't aware of. Isabella considered their options. Going back to the agency was too risky. Without knowing how deep the corruption went, she couldn't trust anyone. And with Chen exposed as a traitor, there would be chaos and suspicion throughout the ranks. All right, she decided. As we do this together, but we need a solid plan. Julian's smile was fierce, determined, already working on it. They ditched the maintenance vehicle at a truck stop and stole a car from the parking lot, continuing their journey toward a location Julian refused to specify over potential listening devices. Hours later, they arrived at an upscale apartment building in the heart of the city, the last place Isabella expected a fugitive crime lord to seek refuge. A prominent real estate developer owns the penthouse, Julian explained as they took the private elevator. He is currently enjoying an extended vacation in the Maldives. And he just gave you his keys? Isabella asked skeptically. Julian's smile was enigmatic. Let us just say he owed me a favor he was very eager to repay. The penthouse was exactly what Isabella would expect from a wealthy developer. Minimalist, expensively furnished, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Julian immediately moved to secure the space, checking for surveillance devices and setting up his own countermeasures. We should be safe here for the next 24 hours, he said, finally relaxing slightly. Enough time to prepare for tomorrow night. Isabella sank onto a plush sofa, the events of the past few days catching up with her. I still can't believe Chen was dirty all along. Power corrupts, Julian said simply, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. He handed one to Isabella and sat beside her. And Petrov offers a lot of power to those willing to look the other way. Isabella accepted the drink, needing its warmth. All this time, I thought I was doing something good, taking down dangerous criminals, protecting innocent people. But I was just a pawn in someone else's game. You were doing good, Julian corrected her. You just didn't know who the real villains were. He studied her over the rim of his glass. For what it's worth, your instincts were right about me. Were they? Isabella looked at him directly. You were still a criminal, Julian. You've still done terrible things. Yes, he acknowledged, without hesitation. Child, I have blood on my hands. I've broken laws, ruined lives, built an empire on other people, is misery. His blue eyes held hers steadily. But there are lines I'd to cross. And when I discovered what Petrov was doing, I could not look away. Why not? What made trafficking different from everything else? Julian was quiet for a long moment. My sister, he finally said. Natalia wasn't always safe. Before I had the means to protect her, before I became who I am now, she was taken, trafficked. His voice was controlled, but Isabella could hear the rage beneath it. I got her back, but not before. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Isabella understood then, the driving force behind Julian's crusade against Petrov, his determination to protect his sister at all costs. That is why we kept her hidden all these years. Julian nodded. I built my entire organization with one purpose in mind, making sure she would always be safe, that she could have the normal life that was nearly stolen from her. He looked away, out at the city lights. Everything else, the money, the power, that was just a means to an end. The Julian Caldwell sitting beside her was far more complex than the criminal mastermind described in her agency, S-Files. He was still dangerous, still capable of terrible things, but there was a code to his actions, a purpose that went beyond simple greed or power. Tomorrow night, Isabella said, steering the conversation back to the immediate challenge. How do we get close enough to Petrov? Julian set down his glass and retrieved a laptop, pulling up architectural plans for an exclusive club in the business district. The poker game is held in a private room on the 3rd floor. Security is tight, armed guards surveillance the works. So frontal assault is out of the question. Definitely, Julian agreed. But there ain't another way in. He pointed to a service entrance. Staff access. The club employs temporary servers for these events. High-end catering company provides them. Isabella caught on immediately. We go in as staff. I go in as a player, Julian corrected. I have an identity that can get me a seat at that table. You go in as staff, where you will have more freedom to move around unnoticed. They spent the next several hours planning meticulously, going over the club, layout, security protocols, and escape routes. Julian made calls from a secure line, arranging the necessary credentials and equipment. Isabella prepared the evidence, organizing it for maximum impact. As night fell, Julian insisted they both get some rest. "Tomorrow will test us in ways we can predict," he warned. "We need to be sharp." The penthouse had 2 bedrooms, but Isabella found herself reluctant to be alone with her thoughts. Julian seemed to sense her unease. "We could watch a movie," he suggested casually. Something mindless to quiet the brain. The normality of the suggestion, so at odds with their life-or-death situation, made Isabella laugh. "A movie, really?" Julian shrugged, a hint of vulnerability in the gesture. Even criminals need to unwind sometimes. Farsam, they ended up on the sofa, watching an old action film that Julian mockingly critiqued for its unrealistic portrayal of criminal organizations. Sometime during the second film, Isabella drifted off to sleep, the exhaustion of the past days finally catching up with her. She woke hours later to find herself still on the sofa, a blanket carefully placed over her. Julian was at the window, silhouetted against the pre-dawn city, his expression pensive. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. He turned, offering a small smile. "Just thinking." "About tomorrow?" "About after." He returned to the sofa, sitting beside her. "If we succeed, if we take down Petrov, what happens then?" It was the question Isabella had been avoiding. In the normal course of events, bringing Julian in would be her duty. He was still a criminal with a long list of charges that would put him away for life. "I do not know," she admitted. "Everything has changed." Julian studied her face in the dim light. "Has it? Or have you just seen the real game being played?" Before she could answer, his hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Isabella, I want you to know that meeting you, even under false pretenses, changed something in me. Made me remember there's more to life than survival and revenge." Isabella knew she should pull away, maintain her professional distance. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "Julian." This time when their lips met, there was no urgency driving them, no life-or-death situation forcing their hand. Just the quiet acknowledgement of something that had been building between them since that first confrontation in his mansion. The kiss deepened, and Isabella felt herself getting lost in it. In him. His arms encircled her, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads touching. Julian's eyes searched hers. "We should stop," he murmured, though his arms remained around her. "We should," Isabella agreed, making no move to pull away. The decision was made in silence, in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Isabella took his hand and led him to the bedroom, where they lost themselves in each other until the rising sun painted the room in gold. Morning brought clarity and renewed purpose. They dressed in silence, the weight of the coming mission settling over them. Julian in an impeccable suit that transformed him from fugitive to sophisticated gambler. Isabella in the uniform of the catering company, her hair pulled back severely, her appearance deliberately forgettable. "Ready?" Julian asked as they prepared to leave separately. Isabella nodded, feeling the weight of the evidence secure in her hidden pocket. "Ready." He kissed her once more, brief but intense. "I'll see you on the other side." They parted ways outside the building, Isabella heading to join the catering staff at their assembly point, Julian to establish his cover identity before the game. The exclusive club was exactly as the plans had depicted, opulent, secure, and crawling with Petrov's men disguised as regular security. Isabella blended in with the other servers, keeping her head down as she was briefed on the evening's procedures. The high-stakes game would begin at 8, with a steady flow of drinks and appetizers required throughout. By 7:30, she was on the 3rd floor, arranging glasses at the bar adjacent to the private gaming room. Through the open door, she could see the green felt table, the stacks of chips being prepared by the dealer. No sign of Petrov yet, but other players were beginning to arrive. Julian entered at 7:45, unrecognizable to all but her. His hair was styled differently, designer glasses perched on his nose. His entire demeanor transformed into that of a tech entrepreneur with money to burn. He took his seat at the table without acknowledging her presence. At 8 precisely, Nikolai Petrov arrived. Isabella had seen photos, but they did not capture the man's commanding presence. Tall, barrel-chested, with a neatly trimmed beard and eyes that missed nothing, he dominated the room instantly. 2 bodyguards flanked him as he took his seat at the head of the table. The game began, and Isabella circulated with drinks, watching the interplay at the table. Julian played his role perfectly, losing just enough to seem like an amateur with deep pockets, gaining Petrov's attention without arousing suspicion. By the 3rd round, Julian had engaged Petrov in casual conversation, steering it gradually toward business opportunities. Isabella, meanwhile, had identified all security personnel and mapped out their positions. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Julian would request a private meeting with Petrov to discuss a potential business venture. Once isolated, they would confront him with the evidence, forcing him to call off his hunt for them in exchange for not releasing the damning information. It was a gamble that relied on Petrov's self-interest and survival instinct. A man like him wouldn't risk losing everything if there was a way to cut his losses. The opportunity came during a break in the game. Julian mentioned a unique investment opportunity that required discretion. Petrov, intrigued by the substantial figures Julian casually mentioned, suggested they speak privately after the game. Isabella caught Julian's slight nod in her direction. They would need to adapt their timeline. She slipped away to prepare, retrieving the hidden weapon she destashed earlier. When the game concluded 3 hours later, Petrov had won a substantial sum, in part because Julian had strategically lost to him. The other players departed, leaving only Petrov, his bodyguards, and Julian. "Mr. Chen," Petrov addressed Julian by his cover name, "shall we discuss this opportunity in my private office?" Julian smiled amiably. "I'd be honored." They moved to a room down the hall, the bodyguards taking positions outside the door. Isabella, clearing glasses nearby, watched as Julian followed Petrov inside. Her part would come next, creating a distraction to deal with the guards. She didn't have to wait long. A commotion erupted downstairs, shouting, the sound of breaking glass. The bodyguards exchanged glances, one moving toward the stairwell to investigate, while the other remained at his post. Isabella approached the remaining guard with a tray of drinks. "The gentleman asked for these," she said deferentially. The guard waved her away. "No one goes in. But Mr. Petrov specifically requested—" "I said no one," the guard repeated firmly. Isabella feigned contrition, then accidentally spilled a drink on the guard's suit. As he cursed and stepped toward her, she struck. A quick, practiced movement that rendered him unconscious before he could cry out. She dragged him into an adjacent room, secured him and took his communication device. Then, retrieving her weapon, she approached Petrov's office. Inside, Julian had Petrov engaged in conversation, the crime lord clearly interested in the fictitious investment opportunity. Isabella slipped in silently, locking the door behind her. Petrov noticed her immediately, his expression hardening. "What is this?" Julian's demeanor changed in an instant, the affable businessman vanishing as he leveled a gun at Petrov. "This is a negotiation, Nikolai." Petrov's eyes darted between them, calculating. "Caldwell," he finally said, recognition dawning. "You've made a serious mistake coming here." "I don't think so," Julian replied calmly. "Agent Hart, show him what we've brought." Isabella placed the flash drive on the desk between them. "Everything, Petrov. Your entire operation documented in extensive detail. Financial records, shipping manifests, names of girls, clients, corrupt officials, including Director Chen. By now, copies of this evidence have been sent to multiple secure locations," Julian continued. "If anything happens to either of us, it all goes public. To law enforcement agencies in 20 countries, to your business partners, to your enemies." Petrov's face remained impassive, but Isabella could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "What do you want?" "Simple," Julian said. "You call off the hunt for us, permanently. You stay away from my sister, and you dismantle your trafficking operation." A cold smile spread across Petrov's face. "Or what? You'll release the evidence? Go ahead. I have contingencies." Do those contingencies include the FSB? Isabella asked pointedly. Because we made sure they received a preview of what you've been doing on their soil. They seemed particularly interested in the underage girls from Moscow. That hit home. Petrov's confidence faltered visibly. The Russian intelligence service was one enemy even he couldn't afford. You're bluffing, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Test us, Julian invited. See what happens. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Petrov exhaled heavily. Suez, what guarantee do I have that you want to release this information anyway once you resafe? The same guarantee we have that you all keep your word, Isabella replied. Mutual assured destruction. You come after us, we destroy you. It is that simple. Petrov considered this, then gave a curt nod. I accept your terms. The hunt is called off. And the trafficking operation? Julian pressed. Will be dismantled, Petrov agreed reluctantly. It has become problematic anyway. Isabella knew they couldn't fully trust his word, but they had achieved their primary objective, neutralizing the immediate threat to themselves and securing Natalia's safety. We'd be leaving now, Julian informed him, backing toward the door with his weapon still trained on Petrov. Remember our arrangement. They slipped out of the office, moving quickly through the now quiet club. The distraction downstairs, which Isabella suspected Julian had arranged through his own contacts, had drawn away most of the security. They emerged into the cool night air, immediately separating and taking different routes to their rendezvous point across the city. Only when they were both safely inside an anonymous hotel room did they allow themselves to breathe freely. He'll honor it, Julian said confidently, removing his disguise. Petrov, as a businessman above all else, he knows when to cut his losses. And Chen? Isabella asked. She is still out there, still corrupt. The evidence implicates her thoroughly, Julian reminded her. And now that Petrov is neutralized, you can choose who within your agency receives that information. Isabella nodded slowly. There were still good people in the agency, people who would act on solid evidence of corruption regardless of who was implicated. What now? She asked, the question encompassing far more than their next tactical move. Julian approached her, taking her hands in his. That depends on you. On me? I am a criminal, Isabella, he said simply. That hasn't changed. I've done things I cannot take back, built a life I cannot simply walk away from. His blue eyes held hers steadily. But I meant what I said about you changing something in me, making me want more than just survival and revenge. Isabella understood the choice before her. She could return to the agency, provide carefully edited evidence that would take down Petrov and Chen without implicating Julian directly. Resume her life as an agent, do the right thing according to the rules she had always followed, or she could choose a different path, one with no clear guidelines, no certainty, but with the promise of something she had never expected to find with her target. Why can it be part of your criminal operations? She said finally. Whatever this is between us, that is my line. Julian nodded, unsurprised. I wouldn't ask you to cross it. But, Isabella continued, I can pretend the world is as black and white as I once believed. Not anymore. She squeezed his hands. I need time, Julian. Time to figure out who I am when I am not following someone else's orders or mission parameters. A time, Julian repeated, a smile touching his lips. I can give you that. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles. I happen to own a very private island where no one would think to look for either of us. Despite everything, Isabella laughed. An island? Really? Really, he confirmed, his eyes warm with promise, complete with pristine beaches and no extradition treaty. In that moment, looking into Julian's eyes, Isabella made her choice. Not forever, perhaps. She wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. But for now, for this chapter of her life, she would follow this unexpected path and see where it led. An island sounds perfect, she said, stepping into his embrace. Later, as they prepared to leave the city under new identities Julian had arranged, Isabella drafted a secure message to the one person in the agency she still trusted, a former colleague who had been sidelined for asking too many questions about certain operations. Attached was enough evidence to expose Chen and dismantle Petrov's network, but with Julian's involvement carefully obscured. It was marked a perfect solution. Some might call it compromise, or even betrayal of her oath as an agent. But in a world where the lines between right and wrong had become blurred, where her own agency had been corrupted by the very criminals it claimed to fight, Isabella chose to follow her own moral compass. As their plane lifted off, carrying them toward an uncertain but shared future, Isabella looked at Julian beside her, the man who had gone from target to protector to something much more complicated. He caught her gaze and smiled, taking her hand in his. Whatever came next, they would face it together, the undercover agent and the crime lord who had discovered something unexpected in each other: redemption, understanding, and the most dangerous loyalty of all. Wow, I told you that ending would be unexpected. If you enjoyed this story, please give this video a thumbs up and share your reactions in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to Hearts of Crime for more captivating stories, just like this one every single day. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now for another incredible tale of love in the criminal underworld. Thank you for watching until the end. May God bless you and your family, and I'll see you in the next video.